Talk Radio.
Mi chiamo Afurakani Afuraitkaitnit, Neye Ojira Da, Medinde Odwirafo Kwesi, Nehem Ptah Akhan, Aakhuamuman Amaruka, Atifi Odwirafo. That means greetings to all Afurakani Afuraitkaitnit people, meaning Africans, Black people. Today is OKRA Day. My name is Odwirafo Kwesi, Nehem Ptah Akhan, Odwirafo of the Aakhuamuman Nation in North America. Yet I'll say we thank you for tuning in. We're opening up the chat room right now. We may have to reboot that because it's taking a minute to come up. And we're going to put some links in the chat room for the information that we'll be going over. So let me reboot the chat room right quick. But for those on the phone line, we will be looking at, if you look at the links that were in the event notification, the OKRA complex, the soul of Akanfo. Also our article, Cartoon, Scholars, Animaniacs, and Animania. We're going to be dealing with that. And the Truth and Falsehood, a text from ancient Kamiti. We're going to be dealing with that as well. So let us see. Try to launch the chat room one more time. But you can go now, you can download the OKRA complex, the soul of Akanfo, from the Nhoma page on our website. Okay, and it's looking like the chat room is taking us a minute to open up. We're having a problem opening up, so we're going to try that again. And in the meantime, for individuals who are new, okay, the chat room is up now. We do have 3 shows weekly, Joda, Denada, and Awukuda, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. We have Akanfo Nana Song, Ancient Authentic, Akhan, Ancestral Religion on Joda Mondays. ODWIRA, which is today, and then we have a Gua Marketplace on Awukuda Wednesdays, where we profile a Black business, service, philosophy behind approaching business, trade, commerce, and so forth, providing products and services to the Afurakani Afuraitkaitnit community, but also maintaining our ancestral values in the process. Okay, so chat room is up. We're going to put the links to the articles in the chat room. That's the first one. The Cartoon Scholars piece. The Truth and Falsehood link. Place that in the chat room. And you can also look at the OKRA complex, the soul of Akanfo, which is one of our books, one of our 15 books. We're going to check that out as well. Okay, so for individuals who are unaware, also, let's put the website up there. Our regular website is Odwirafo.com. We put the link to our Akanfo page, which is the page dealing with our institution. So Akanfo is the central institution of learning within the Afurakani Afuraitkaitnit people, us, Aakhuamuman, Amaruka, Atifi, the Aakhuamuman Nation in North America. So all of our classes, all of the publications that we have produced, we have 15 books, over 60 articles, videos, webcasts, and so forth. Everything that we produce is comes up out of this institution. What we're doing right now, we're in the midst of a campaign to raise funds to establish a permanent physical location for the institution. We will continue and expand our classes, our regular classes, and people who are not able to attend physically sessions, which will be in the Washington, D.C. area. We will live stream the various classes. So whether it's the classes based on our publications, whether workshops, Oberima Afurakani Manhood workshops based on our book, Oberima Afurakani Manhood, Of course, we have our Aakhuamuman, substance abuse abstinence. We have a ritual method to address that based on Ancestral Religion. We have Aakhuamuman, which deals with overcoming the negative effects of domestic abuse, a ritual method based on our Ancestral Religion to deal with that, as well as intergenerational and transcarnational trauma. We have the classes dealing with Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, Ancestral Religion in its various aspects, and we examine the various texts that we deal with and the books that we have published. We also have our publishing arm, which is basically not only do we publish the softcover versions of our books, so all of the 15 books we've written, plus the articles as well, all of them, the ebook versions are free downloads from the website. The softcover versions we publish and we print ourselves in-house on our own printers in color, so we do sell the softcover versions. They range between $8 and $11, and we do all of our printing. So in the center, we will have the printing, publishing arm of the, of the institution there in the center. That will become an employment opportunity for individuals in the community, as well as we already have the entrepreneurship opportunity which exists right now, for individuals who would like to distribute our softcover publications. Basically, you will simply purchase them wholesale, and then you can sell them retail and generate income for yourself by sharing the publications with friends, family, coworkers, and so forth, people you come in contact with. You can disseminate proper, accurate information, but you also, generate income for yourself at the same time. So you generate positive income, revenue in a positive fashion that impacts the community in a positive fashion and impacts yourself in a positive fashion as well. So that will be expanded, as well as employment opportunities at the center once we are able to establish the physical base for the center, as well as the various classes that we have will be expanded. And you'll see on the link, the Akanfo link, you'll see the various details with regard to that, including the ritual aspect, ancestral observances, our 7-day New Year celebration that happens every September, conferences, a number of different things. So what's going on, we'll put the link also. So that's the regular link to the website dealing with the center. We also have a GoFundMe page. So that's one way to contribute. Anybody who makes a contribution through the GoFundMe campaign, you will receive one or more of our softcover books in return for your donation. So it's not just a donation you will receive. It's just like making a purchase. You make a donation, but that's really like making a purchase. You will receive a book, at the same one or more books, and at the same time, you're also assisting us to establish the center, which will be accessible to Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people in this region, but also worldwide via live streaming. Of course, it's for Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people only. All right, so we're going to get into, look at the links we just posted up. Cartoon Scholars, Animaniacs, and Animania. And we also have the piece for Truth and Falsehood, which is a text from Ancient Kemet. Then we have the link to our OKRA complex, the soul of Akanfo. So first, the title of the show, you'll see it says, and when you look at the image, the HWEHWEMUDUA. So, and you'll see this at the end of the Cartoon Scholars article, but that specific Adinkra symbol, the Akhan people of Ghana, Ivory Coast, have hundreds of Adinkra symbols that we utilize to transfer knowledge of the culture. Every symbol represents a specific object or entity in creation, but it also has Ebe, divine wisdom teaching, proverbial wisdom, but ancestrally inherited wisdom associated with each symbol. So one or more teachings is associated with the symbol. So every time you see the symbol, you're reminded of the same, the teaching, the divine wisdom teaching that's been inherited intergenerationally. The symbols, of course, also are used ritually, used on shrines, used on abosom fie or shrine houses, used similar to the form or in the manner that Veves in Vodun tradition are used, or the Dikenga in the Bakongo tradition are used. These geometric symbols that carry a specific configuration of energy that become a magnet for the abosom when they are drawn, a magnet for the Nananom Samanfo, the spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors when they are drawn and utilized in a ritual fashion. So they're utilized for a number of different things, but they're always informing us, always aligning us with Nyamewa, Nyame, and Sheshe divine order. Of course, many of these symbols you'll find the same symbols, root symbols, as Medutu hieroglyphs in ancient Kemet, and then they are still used today in the Akhan tradition. So, for example, they'll say the parent of all of the Adinkra symbols is the Adinkra Henni symbol, which is a circle with a dot in the middle, or two circles with a dot in the middle, concentric circles. That's the parent of the various Adinkra symbols. It's the root pattern from which all of the other Adinkra symbols are birthed, so to speak. This is why it's called Adinkra Henni. Henni means king, ruler, sovereign. The same in Akhan as it does in ancient Kemet. Henni meaning king, ruler, sovereign, and so forth. Adinkra Henni, or the circle with the dot in the middle, the king or the ruler or the sovereign or the parent of all of the Adinkra symbols. Well, of course, the circle with the dot in the middle is the representation of Ra and Ra'et in ancient Kemet, the creator and creatress. So the same symbol that is a representation of the creator and creatress, or the great ancestral spirit who gave birth to our people in the beginning. Then you have Adinkra Henni, the king Henni, or ruler, sovereign Henni of the Adinkra symbol, and it's still the circle with the dot in the middle. That's Ra, that's Ra'et. So that's just an example, but the various Adinkra symbols, many of them are directly from ancient Hanat and Kemet, ancient Nubia, in Egypt. You look at the Cartoon Scholars article, you see the HWEHWEMUDUA. HWEHWE means to look. HWEHWE means to look. Look meaning looking intensively, thorough examination, critical examination. Mu means within. So if you go to the bottom of the article, we show not only the symbol and its name, but we also show the specific ebe associated with it, the ancestral wisdom teaching associated with it. Well, which means you look within and you gain knowledge or understand or see what is within. You must examine things in order to understand what undergirds the birth of these things. If you don't engage in critical examination in a holistic fashion, in a full holistic fashion, then you're not going to understand what you need to understand, and therefore you will make decisions that lead to disordered behavior, discordant results, disharmony in the community, disharmony within yourself, and so forth. So this is a call and a reminder towards critical examination, looking intensely within so that you can see what is within. That's key, because very often we don't do that, even though people talk about that, talk about critical examination, talk about don't listen to me, just check it out for yourself and all of that, but people don't do that. And if we simply adhere to this admonition from the Nananom Nsamanfo, and which people are going to begin to do intensively from this point on, if we just simply adhere to that admonition, then most 95, 96, 97+% of the misinformation and self-destructive behavior we engage in can be eliminated simply by examining
intensely. HWEHWEMUDUA. When you look at that symbol, it is, they'll talk about it as a measuring stick, really a divining rod. So you'll hear the term, for example, dowsing in European so-called culture. HWEHWEMUDUA. Hwe means to look. HWEHWE means to look. Mu means within. Odwira or Edwira means stick or staff or rod, like a stick from a tree and so forth. So the HWEHWEMUDUA is the looking within stick or the looking within rod, the divining rod. So when people have a Y-shaped rod, very often a stick or a branch, and they hold the Y section in their hands, and the leg is sticking straight out, and then they hold it over the ground and they walk. And at some point, when they walk over an area where there's water underneath, deep underneath the ground, then the Edwira, the stick, will bend towards the ground, bend towards the water. And then people will know this is where we need to dig a well because there's water deep underground. So it's a divining rod. HWEHWEMUDUA. Look within stick or rod. You don't know what's under the surface if you're just looking on the surface. So you take something, a tool, an instrument, so that you can investigate, so that you can examine, so you can look within, but not just look on the surface, but look, look intensively. Critical examination. And then the tool that you use will direct you towards the source that you're looking for, the water that's under the ground that you can't see on the surface, but you're drawn to it. And then once you're drawn to it, because you utilize that proper tool, then when you dig the well and you go deep within, you'll be able to confirm physically and tangibly what the divining rod showed you on the surface. And you'll be able to bring it home. It's the same thing with regard to your Kra and with regard to your Hunhum, as we call the Ka and the Eku ancient Kemet, the Kra and the Hunhum in Akhan tradition. When you look within, when you engage that part of that, the physical seat, the pineal gland is the physical seat of the Eku, divine wisdom, intuitive faculty, that force that dwells within your head region. It's called Hunhum in Akhan tradition, and we had a whole broadcast dealing with that. But when you utilize that instrument, that quote-unquote third eye, but it really is an organ, and the spiritual force that animates that organ, when you utilize that and activate that, the eye of your Kra, to attune and critically examine what someone is saying, what someone is doing, what's going on, whether it's plant life, animal life, mineral life, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, human life, as well as what your enemies are doing, our enemies are doing, the whites and their offspring. When you utilize that organ to look within, then you gain knowledge of what's undergirding behavior, what's undergirding events, what's shaping events as they are unfolding, what's going to take place, how to avoid negative consequences before they unfold or unravel and so forth. So once you do that, you're utilizing your spiritual insight, humu, to attune. Once you do that, then you bring it home. You find out tangibly, you'll be able to confirm tangibly what your humu or your insight showed you non-physically. So just like the divining rod finds the source by being drawn and bending to the source, the stick is bent towards the water, but then you dig the well and you confirm what the divining rod showed you. When your humu, your divine insight coming from your hunhum, from your eku, from your quote-unquote spiritual pineal gland, allows you to attune into the nature of a thing, the nature of an individual, the nature of an event, then you gain that knowledge. Then you can confirm it physically through physical, tangible experience, and that takes it from the spirit realm to the physical realm. Takes it from quote-unquote heaven to earth. It brings the physical proof of what you've been given spiritually, so you can always confirm with the nanano msamanfo,
the ancestresses and ancestors show you, what the abosom, the divinities, show you, what your own crowd, of course, which is a divinity, shows you, and so forth. So we always have that confirmation. So this is what this symbol is dealing with, and if we just adhere to that, then most of the problems that we have will be overcome. So this is why we need to focus on this and inculcate this within our consciousness on a not just a surface level, but so we can be conscious of it, not so that it's just unconscious and every now and then we attune to this and we, make the right decisions, but we need to be focused on that on a consistent basis. That's the difference between a child and an adult. When we're talking about, before we get into that article, we also had a ebe, which you'll find that on our Facebook page. We have a few mbe or ebes or proverbial wisdom from Aakhuamuman, the Aakhuamu nation in North America. One of them is Akasakasa, ye mmofrasem. Akasakasa means foolish debate, chatter, idle talk. Akasakasa, ye is mmofrasem. Mofra is plural for abofra, which is a child, and asem means issues, affairs, and so forth. So akasakasa ye mmofrasem means foolish debate, argument. Is mmofrasem is for children. It is the affairs of children. Debates are for children. Adults don't engage in foolish debate. If you are mature and you're sincere, if you have information for the Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit community, then you give the information to the Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit community. If you're immature, you're not interested in accurate information that is helpful to the community, you're only interested in being entertained. And whatever, tickles your fancy, so to speak, your conditioned, immature consciousness, whatever makes you feel good, then you will entertain that and you will perpetuate that if you're immature. Or if you're a criminal and you want to control the minds of people, manipulate the minds of people, you will promote idiocy, misinformation that only reaffirms what's been already programmed negatively into the consciousness of people. But if you're intelligent and you're mature and you're sincere, if you have accurate information for the community that's beneficial to the community, then you will give it to the community. If you're intelligent, mature, sincere, and you engage that process, then there's no need for debate. If somebody wants to debate because they're, one, ignorant of the facts, well, if you're sincere, you just give them the information. You wouldn't argue with a mentally ill individual. You wouldn't argue with a 3-year-old child about something that obviously they don't know about. You just give them the information. You recognize why they're saying what they're saying, and you give them the information if you're sincere. You don't argue with an ignorant individual because if you're sincere, all you want to do is give them information to help them get on the right track and let them digest that. If you have a desire to engage them in foolish debate, then you lowered yourself to the level of a child. If somebody wants to engage in debate and they're not really interested in truth, immature people, they're not going to accept the truth no matter what. So if you engage them in debate, it's going to be a waste of time anyway, because if they're not interested in truth, anything you say, they're going to figure out a way to twist it back into making themselves feel good about the ignorance that they have embraced and they continue to perpetuate. That's the immature. And then, of course, the criminal who is trying to manipulate individuals by deliberately putting forward false information, it's a waste of time to debate an individual like that. Just beyond the maturity aspect of it, where you would engage debating just in general, even if you did engage, slipped up and engaged in debate with such an individual, they're never going to embrace truth because their whole goal is to misinform people. So whether somebody is ignorant and immature or if they're criminal, either way, engaging debate on either side is a waste of time, because they're either going to reject the truth because of immaturity or reject it because they're criminal and they have a criminal agenda. So you're wasting your time and you're also making yourself
lowering yourself to an immature level. If you're sincere, if you're mature, and if you're intelligent, and you have accurate information for the community, then you will give that information to the community. And if people who are actually sincere, even though they may be ignorant of the facts, but are actually sincere, the sincere ones will study that information, incorporate it. If they have questions, they will ask questions. They will continue to investigate. If they're not sincere, they will take that information and try to figure out a way to manipulate it, to twist it, or dismiss it. So you deal with the individuals who are sincere, and you move forward. And you're dismissive of the ones who are idiots as well as the ones who are agents. Idiots and agents are not deserving of dialogue, and that includes on Facebook or anywhere else. We can shut down, there are many agents all over Facebook, the whites and their offspring, as well as their black, flunkies. They're black agents who create little profiles, get on, forums and other people's timelines and start making all kinds of insane statements or injecting perversity, white culture, trying to get you to embrace nonsense. There are agents all over Facebook and other social media. What people need to begin to do is, as soon as somebody makes foolish statements, block them, shut them down, and dismiss them instantly and forever. That's the way you deal with agents. That's the way you deal with idiots. Because the idiots, even though they may not be agents, if they're just immature and ignorant, all they want to do is argue about nonsense because they're conditioned and don't want to let go of the conditioning because of, really some mental instability, then engaging somebody like that is a waste of your time and it's just immature in and of itself. But when you shut individuals like that down, block them. Just imagine if thousands of our people, millions of our people start blocking these fools at their first instance of nonsensical talk, nonsensical speech, nonsensical posts, and so forth. Then you'll shut them all out. And the only thing you'll have on your feed is intelligent conversation, information that's actually something that's useful and so forth. So we need to move in that direction. So, but getting back to the article, and this is one of the reasons we wrote this article, but it has to do with that principle dealing with HWEHWEMUDUA, looking within so you can investigate. Most of our problems are based on us taking in misinformation and operating based on that. Millions of black people think foolishly that God is a white man named Jesus. False information that we have taken in, we did not examine, we did not reject, we just embraced it and began to operate based on that nonsense. Whether it's any form of Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hebrewism, pseudo-mysticism, pseudo-esotericism, Hinduism, whatever it is. Because we have not investigated and then rejected the nonsense, we make self-destructive decisions all day long. We embrace our enemies, we embrace their foolish culture, and we wonder why we're suffering. So simply rejecting disorder is the key to liberation. Because you reject it mentally, but then you also reject it physically. That means waging war against the enemy physically. That's a rejection. Remember, divine order is comprised of divine law or love and divine hate. You embrace through law and you reject through hate. If you don't understand divine hate, you don't know what to reject. If you don't know what to reject, you begin to accept and hold on to all kinds of nonsense and then trying to force fit it and make it Afrocentric or make it part of your culture and try to make it into something that it's not because you don't understand or you haven't attuned to the divine forces of divine hate. So that's why, again, going back to Nyame and Sheshe, divine order, law, and hate is critical to everything that we're doing. So if you look at this article, you'll see we get into some specifics with regard to this. Let me make sure we don't have any questions in the chat room. All right. Okay, so this is the Cartoon Scholars article. I'll put the link back up in the chat room for the people who just came in, and you can download it right now. All right. So we say there are individuals within our population who we classify as cartoon scholars. Such individuals publish written, video, and or audio, work, or presentations whose philosophical, theological, cosmological, linguistic, etc. foundations are consistently inaccurate, yet they promote themselves as teachers, scholars, healers, leaders, spiritualists, experts, scientists, of course, elders, elderesses, master teachers, priests, priestesses, all of that kind of nonsense. Cartoon scholars are typically very animated, often narcissistic, argumentative, quick to anger when shown to be wrong, and very often seek out debates in public and private. They tend to be very articulate in their own way and therefore persuasive to some. They often claim some form of expertise while simultaneously attempt to fraudulently and or foolishly graft Eurasian perverse philosophies onto authentic Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, or African ancestral culture, religion, and truthstory. This includes attempting to retroactively date, fraudulently historicize, and or quote-unquote Africanize Eurasian concepts and practices such as any form of Islam, Hebrewism, Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, Moorishism, extraterrestrialism, atheism, pseudo-esotericism, dissexuality, homosexuality, pedophilia, unconditional love, which is a foolish concept, racial quote-unquote inclusion, etc. All these different things and more, they attempt to retroactively date and fraudulently historicize and or Africanize. They also misinterpret and distort ancient Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit cosmology in ways that are fundamentally Eurocentric in nature, in conflict with Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit reality, yet cloaked in Afrocentric and or scientific jargon. So you'll find individuals who will take the cosmology of Kemet, for example, and they're so steeped in Eurocentric nonsense, but they haven't learned divine hate, for example. They don't know how to reject. So they're enamored with the whites and their offspring. They think the whites and their offspring are superior. They won't admit that up front, but they believe the whites and their offspring are superior. So when they read nonsense like the Kabbalah or Sufism or anything like that, Hermeticism, they can't see the idiocy of those practices. So but they think it's superior. But they don't want to admit that they worship the whites and their offspring because they're supposed to be Afrocentric or cultural or African-centered and so forth. So they'll take that nonsense and try to say, well, it all came from us, so we can use it. And then they try to Africanize it or say this is what our ancestors were teaching. And then they begin to simply promote Eurocentric nonsense in blackface and then call it Afrocentric and then start having seminars and teachings and writing books and doing videos on Eurocentric nonsense wrapped up and cloaked in Afrocentric jargon. They'll have the same mindset when they come out of Christianity or come out of Islam or come out of Hebrewism or Hinduism or something like that, Vedanta, Buddhism. They'll still have the same mindset. They'll call themselves scholars, teachers, elders, elderesses, but they have that white, corrupted mindset because they've never embraced divine hate, just by virtue of the fact that they think hate is evil, or hate is an emotion that we shouldn't deal with, or hate is immature. They learned that from the whites and their offspring. They don't know that they're deities of hate because the whites and their offspring didn't teach them that, and they still worship the whites and their offspring. So they still have that mindset, and they'll bring the Eurocentric mindset into studying and teaching about Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit culture. For example, they'll talk about ancient Kemet, the culture of ancient Kemet. They didn't have a religion. Pure stupidity. What fool will look at all the gods, goddesses, all the offerings, all the rituals, all the temples and so forth, look at all that, ignore it all, and say, well, we didn't have a religion. Because the whites and their offspring, the pseudo-New Age pseudo-spiritualists want to say there's a difference between religion and spirituality. Of course, we did a broadcast proving etymologically and cosmologically that religion and spirituality are identical. Fake religion is not identical with spirituality, but real religion is. Ancestral religion and spirituality is identical. But Negroes like to embrace nonsense from the whites and offspring because they believe deep down inside that they're superior and that our ancestral culture and religion is inferior and primitive, and they're embarrassed of it and ashamed of it, but they don't want to say that up front because they claim to be Afrocentric or cultural or whatever. So therefore, they have to figure out ways to incorporate white nonsense. So, but just getting back to the whole notion of taking the culture of ancient Kemet, saying that it's not religious. Of course, our people practice religion. We were getting possessed by the abosom, the deities, the ancestral spirits, praying to the Great Father, praying to the Great Mother, praying to the various deities, all these prayers and hymns and so forth. These Negroes will look past all of that and say, oh, there was no religion in ancient Kemet. We were just a spiritual people, and we just studied nature, and we were just scientists, and once we studied things, we anthropomorphized nature and created myths, and that was a scientific process. That's idiotic. Individuals who can only observe nature and then come up with little stories about nature to try to explain it, those are individuals who are on an inferior level because they have no capacity. We're talking about the whites and their offspring. That means white Asians, white Hindus, white Europeans, white Americans, white Hispanics, white pseudo-Native Americans, and so forth. They do not have the capacity to communicate with the abosom, the Orisha, the Vodou, who animate the oceans, rivers, Earth, Mother, Sun, and so forth. They can't communicate with them, so they can't attune to the laws that govern their functioning in creation and then replicate a society based on those laws. They can't do that. So all they can do is observe what's happening on the outside and try to create little stories. Our people can attune to the actual forces in nature. That's superior. And then we establish civilizations based on that communication. The whites and offspring can't do that. But Negroes want to believe that it's superior to sit around and engage in pseudo-empirical studies, trial and error, and coming up with, hypotheses and so forth, and talking about this is the way we develop society. The same way George Washington Carver revolutionized agriculture in this country when he said he went into nature every morning, communicated with the spirits in nature, learned directly from them, and then went to the lab, took it from the spiritual and made it tangible in the physical, and created hundreds of products from sweet potatoes and peanuts and all these different things, and revolutionized agriculture in the entire country, as well as impacting the entire world. Just like he did that here, the black person, a part of our community here, we've been doing that for thousands of years. We did the same thing in ancient Kannat, Nubia, Kemet, Egypt, and so forth, and across the continent. This is why we were able to build civilizations, a social order rooted in the divine order of creation. This is why the whites and offspring can only establish societies, but they can't establish civilized society. A civilization is a social order rooted in the divine order of creation and a reflection of that. If you can't attune to the forces, the abosom, that govern creation, that animate every aspect of creation, you cannot know creation, and therefore you cannot develop a society that's rooted in that order. Only we can do that, and this is why we built great civilizations. Negroes don't want to understand that because they're so inculcated with white nonsense and pseudo-scientific empiricism that they want to believe that all we did was sit around and measure things and then come up with stories. Real empirical data comes first from direct communication with the abosom that animates nature, getting the information from them, and then establishing forms, establishing practices, establishing methodologies, establishing structures that reflect what you learn from the abosom. And of course, when you pay attention to what they give you, then what you create is going to be just as harmonious as the natural structures in creation. And then again, you bring that what's spiritual to the physical, to the tangible. So, when you have Negroes say there was no religion, We were just scientists. You know they don't know what they're talking about. You know these are self-hating individuals deep down inside. When they say we were monotheistic, these are Negroes talking about we only believed in the one God. Even the term monotheism, to associate that ignorance with our culture is nonsense. There's a great father, there's a great mother. There's Amen, there's Animaniacs. There's the various divinities that we communicate with on a regular basis. But if you don't communicate with them, of course the whites and their offspring cannot. So therefore they don't want us to, because they want us to worship them. This is why they create the fake religions, to try to lure us away from attuning to the real forces in nature and to follow their fake white God. Because they hate the fact that they're inferior and they cannot communicate with the forces of nature, and we can. But then you have Negroes who are still brainwashed by the whites and their offspring, and they'll say, well, you know, we were monotheistic. We didn't believe in many gods. We just believed in the laws of the gods. They just represent the laws of the great one God, the great one creator. You know, you have brainwashed individuals when they talk about there's a creator. They don't know who the creator is. They think they're Amen and Ra and Ptah and Atem are all just different names or aspects of the creator. Totally inaccurate. These are totally different deities that all work together and have their own functions in creation. Amen is the supreme being, the great male. Amenet is the great mother, supreme being, who work together. Ra and Ra'et are the creator and creatress, and they are the grandchildren of the supreme being. Their father and mother is Nun and Nunet. Atem is a child of Ra. And then you have Asaset Nebet Hetepet and Asaset Nebet Pet. And then Kepra, these four different divinities, two male, two female, work together, but there's a hierarchy, and Ra and Ra'et are above them. Then you also have Ptah, who's a different divinity. So when Negroes talk about we're monotheistic, they're enunciating and declaring to you that they don't know anything about the culture, and they still worship white culture, trying to force the idiocy of monotheism on our culture. They'll talk about Ma'at, they never heard of Ma'al. But at the same time, they will call themselves master teachers, elders, been teaching for 30 years, and never mention the deity, male deity Ma'al once, let alone invoke this divinity. It's not that he hasn't existed. If you were attuned to the forces of nature, you would have been invoking him all along. But then to put yourself forward as teachers, leaders, spiritualists, experts, establishing institutions, and training people in misinformation, this is what's going on. Now, it's one thing to be misinformed, because we've all been misinformed. We're raised in a perverse culture. So this is why we need to study, investigate, HWEHWEMUDUA, critically examine what we're given, so we can get to the truth and attune to our own cry our soul, divine consciousness. But some people don't want to admit that they've been misinformed. They would like to be seen as master teachers and elders and priests and leaders and experts and everything else. And this is where you get into the cartoon scholars. So we say they're very animated. We went into detail about that. Then we say, having worked in the field of mental health for a number of years on the conventional side, as well as the ritual side, via the practice of Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, Ancestral Religion, we recognize that there is a small percentage of Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people in our community who suffer from what in our Akhan culture we call Odwirafo, which is madness, mental illness. In Eurasian parlance, such individuals will be classified as suffering from disorders such as major depressive disorder, schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, bipolar disorder, and etc. When we say we worked in the field of mental health, on the conventional side, that means the regular conventional side where you work for an agency or work for agency contracting with, Child and Family Services or the Department of Mental Health or something like that. We've done that. That's the conventional side of mental health. But then also on the ritual side, dealing with people understanding what's really the cause of these spiritual illnesses, these behavioral disturbances. Sometimes people do have a physical issue. Sometimes people have a traumatic brain injury. Sometimes people chemically, they've been doing drugs and things like that, and their neurons, their synapses are not functioning properly. They've been compromised because of the drug use or because of an injury or something else. Very often, however, most of the people who are going in getting therapy because of trauma, depression, or schizophrenia or whatever, when they don't have these, that small percentage who have an actual injury to the brain, people are dealing with discarnate ancestral spirits and discarnate spirits that are unrelated. They can hear them, they can see them, they can feel them, they can experience them, but everybody else is telling them, you're not seeing anything, you're not hearing anything, whatever. And they become very disenchanted, they become very despondent, they become very nervous, worried, scared, terrorized because they don't know what's happening. Nobody can see or hear what they're hearing and seeing, and then when they try to, deal with people and talk to people, then they tell them that they're crazy, they need to get locked up in a mental institution, they need to get pumped full of drugs and so forth, and then the people just decide to check out of this reality because focusing on the reality is too painful. Now, if they embrace ancestral religion and culture, they can identify, okay, these are discarnate spirits, this is what I need to do to repel them, then I can move on and function harmoniously, and then I can also connect with other individuals who understand and can see these entities as well and know what's really going on, and I'm not going to be placed in some box where I'm insane. So we dealt with that on the so-called conventional side as well as, the ritual side. So when you have individuals, and it's a stigma in our community, if you have some manifestation of a behavioral health issue, mental health issue, it's always been a stigma to go to a psychiatrist, psychologist, therapist, and so forth to get some assistance. Now, on one hand, it makes sense that it's a stigma because, of course, they drug our people, they lie to our people, they try to force false doctrine into our people. So it makes sense that our people don't want to have anything to do with some mental health professional. Every now and then you'll have a mental health professional, psychiatrist, therapist, psychologist, community support worker, case manager, whatever, social worker, who actually, in spite of the system, they put themselves in the system so they can assist our people in spite of the system, against the system. Once you get the person in the room and you're in a therapeutic setting, it's all confidential, and you can teach them and give them information that's accurate and real. And that's the kind of information that doesn't show up on the progress notes or the encounter notes and so forth. That's the kind of information that actually heals the individual. So some of our people get into human services for that reason. This is the way they can teach culture to people who are suffering and transform people. You pay for it at the same time and actually go within the system, infiltrate the system, and get to our people where our people are. So you have people like that. But very often you have individuals who are just as brainwashed as the whites in their offspring want them to be. They embrace these pseudo-philosophies of psychology. They pump our people full of drugs. If they're seeing something, seeing some discarnate spirits and so forth, they'll tell them they're having hallucinations. They'll start trying to analyze them in a foolish way, talking about their childhood and different things. They're going to therapy for years, spending all this money, all this time, no forward movement at all, and all it would take is 1 5-minute ritual to help repel the ancestral spirit that's been plaguing them, and it would have been over 10 years ago. But mental health professionals are brainwashed because psychology is not a science. It's just white people trying to tell you what's going on inside of your conscious sphere of awareness and misinforming you deliberately and trying to keep you away from your culture and trying to drug the people, poison people, and so forth. So, but the key is, because we have that experience, and many of our people have those experiences working with individuals or having people in families who are manifest behavioral illnesses. Some are very severe. Some of them are not as severe. Some people have an ancestral spirit that messes with them every now and then, and causes problems and distress because the people don't know how to handle it. Some people have certain ancestral spirits who hang around them all the time, or discarnate entities that hang around them all the time, always influencing them, and it causes them more distress than the average individual. So we say the cartoon scholars very often fit into one of these categories, some more extreme than others. On balance, they are fundamentally individuals who are emotionally unstable. This accounts for their incessant, passive-aggressive, and sometimes violent reaction, verbal and sometimes physical, when people demonstrate their quote-unquote scholarship to be inaccurate, reject their arguments, or simply dismiss them wholesale without prejudice. These expressions of emotional instability manifest within the personalities of the cartoon scholars is what defines them as what we call Animaniacs who suffer from Animania. And the reason we say that is because, or use that terminology, extremely disordered, animated behavior rooted in delusions of grandeur tied to a false sense of trustery, spirituality, and culture powered by a deeply seated sense of inadequacy. So when you have individuals who are writing, teaching, scholars, writers, presenters, and so forth, whether they have stuff on the internet or even you're on Facebook and you see these people, as soon as they're challenged, they get angry, they start typing in all caps, they're arguing, fighting, passive-aggressive, creating totally separate forums just to attack somebody who went against them on another forum, and just all kinds of insanity. When you have somebody engaged in that, that's beyond immaturity. Yes, you can have a young person who's immature and they just like to debate and argue and fight and be silly, and it's like a sport. Where you have individuals who claim to be experts or claim to have some body of knowledge that they're deeply vested in that other people don't have, and claim to be teachers and so forth, and instructing individuals, and they're engaging in this kind of behavior because they're challenged, and when they're exposed, then their inadequacy, their deeply seated sense of inadequacy is exposed, they get violently angry. You're dealing with individuals who are emotionally unstable. And you have a large percentage of these individuals who are speaking, teaching. Some of them have degrees. Some of them are teaching in colleges. Some of them just creating videos or writing books or doing whatever, documentaries, whatever it is. You have emotionally unstable individuals, people suffering from Odwirafo, and this is why they manifest this animated behavior, this insanely animated behavior. That's why we would say Animaniacs, Animania, cartoon scholars. So then we say, as is true with others suffering from various expressions of mental illness, we do not engage Animaniacs in arguments, debates, etc. While some of the cartoon scholars are clearly agents of the whites and their offspring, for example, a Ray Hagen, agent of the whites and their offspring. So while some of them are clearly agents of the whites and their offspring sent to pollute the minds of Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit with Eurocentric dogma, others, and this is the majority, others are simply emotionally unstable individuals who have forged a false identity upon an insecure foundation. When we are presented with information from cartoon scholars, all it takes is a simple and brief investigation of the information to demonstrate its invalidity. We can therefore summarily dismiss the information and the individual if we entertain it and them in the first place and continue to move forward. This renders the Animaniacs powerless, for their very existence is predicated upon engaging anyone in useless debate. They seek only a forced acceptance. Any time spent engaging an Animaniac is time that could have been used more judiciously. Moreover, whether wittingly or unwittingly, the cartoon scholar, the Animaniac, only works to perpetuate ignorance within our community and by default supports the perpetuation of white rule. we must be focused on the growth and development of ourselves and our people based on the inclusion of accurate information and the exercise of proper insight. The Animaniac must ultimately recognize and seek help to overcome his or her illness. Such help does exist. Let us be cognizant of the cartoon scholars, the Animaniacs, and operate accordingly. So you have individuals, and you'll see this not only with scholars, but you'll see this in your own family, amongst your family members, sometimes significant others and so forth, people who are not related to you, who their whole identity is based on projecting a notion that they have information that other people don't have. If that identity is pierced by truth and reality and accurate information exposes them for not knowing what they're talking about, then for them, that's like murder. That's like homicide, because their whole identity, their life is based on promoting this idea that they know something and other people don't know. And if people stop listening to them and cut them off, then that's death to them. So they will just engage anybody in debate just to keep themselves alive. This is a parasite who needs a host. They will latch on, and engage in argument. Even if you don't want to talk about it or even want to leave the room, and they want to follow you around trying to engage you in debate. Or you're on a forum on Facebook and they're going to follow you to your inbox, follow you to your timeline. Days later, they're still trying to get you to engage in some debate when you've already rejected them. Why does an individual have to continue these arguments? Why are they hunting you down, tracking you down, or tracking other individuals down? And if they're screaming loudly, it's like typing in all caps and nobody's paying attention, then they have to create some other disturbance or something to draw attention to themselves. You're not just dealing with an immature individual. You're dealing with an emotionally unstable individual, somebody who has a mental illness. And we have many people, you'll be surprised. You work at a mental health agency and you see people coming in. Some of the people, yes, they look like they have a mental illness. They look disheveled. Clothes are not on properly, or they're not taking care of themselves with regard to hygiene. But then you have other individuals who are doctors, people, lawyers, people who are, law enforcement, so-called law, all areas of activity, all fields of endeavor. Individuals who are teachers, principals, some of them therapists, everything you can imagine, engineers, doctors, and you'll see these individuals coming in, receiving therapy. Of course, it's confidential. It's against the law because of HIPAA rules. You can't share information with regard to somebody having a diagnosis. Therapists can't share that. Nobody in the office can share that. It has to be kept confidential. So you have individuals that you may be working with or people that you know. You don't realize that some of these individuals have major depressive disorder. They are schizophrenic. Some of them are psychopaths. Bipolar disorder. They're on medication. You don't know that they're on medication. You don't know what happens when they're not on the medication. And of course, the medication causes all kinds of negative side effects. There's a percentage of our people who are severely mentally ill, and individuals don't know it. Most of our people, like we said, there's a stigma to deal with mental health just in general, which makes sense. In reality, our ancestral religions always took care of and help people overcome these mental illnesses by removing the spiritual agents that will cause these mental illnesses and cause these disruptive behaviors and so forth. So normally we would take care of that within our own culture, of course. Confronted with the nonsense of the whites and our offspring, now we're forced into, some of our people feel they're forced into those avenues and given medication and false philosophy and so forth and locked into some nonsense for decades very often until they die. So there is a stigma. So most people, they're not going to go to some mental health professional. If you have about 100 people and 3 of them are mentally ill, some of them are schizophrenic, one is schizophrenic, one has bipolar one disorder and somebody else has major depressive disorder, two of them are not going to go to any kind of mental health agency. They're not going to seek out help from anybody. And most often because they don't think there's anybody who can help them, because most of our people in this culture have been brainwashed, so they really can't help them because they don't know what to do. So at least two of them are not going to go anywhere. Maybe one of them will go seek out some help from somebody, whether it's a close friend or somebody they think is a therapist, but who's a therapist who works outside of the system and is really trying to help people. They may connect with somebody like that. But the other two, they're not getting any help from anybody. They're just out here talking crazy, engaged in all kinds of negative relationships, and you're wondering why people call them crazy and say there's something wrong with them. I always knew there was something wrong with them. He's just too intense, too aggressive. She's too intense, too aggressive. People are not going to get help. So we have people in our community that we don't typically think about. And when you've been in the mental health field and you see these individuals coming in and out of these institutions, or you visit people in psychiatric hospitals or the psychiatric ward in hospitals or the psychiatric ward in, if they're locked up and they're in the psych ward during jail time, and then you go and visit and have to, take notes and do whatever you're doing professionally. You see some of these individuals, and then when you're out in the regular quote-unquote society, you recognize there's a certain percentage of these individuals out here that nobody knows about. But you're actually engaging them on a regular basis. And many of them are your quote-unquote spiritual leaders, elders, elderesses, master teachers, scholars, quote-unquote, all these titles. And you always knew something wrong. You always knew something wrong when they were challenged and then they went ballistic or had some passive-aggressive response to being challenged because they were shown that what they've been talking about all these years is totally inaccurate. We're dealing with people who are emotionally unstable. So we need to understand that. So before we go to the next piece, we want to make sure we didn't miss anything in the chat room. And by the way, we did a broadcast dealing with called Nkomo, mental illness, reincarnation, race and reincarnation. So we went into detail about that, and we actually did it last year. It's about almost like a year ago on like December 21st or December 22nd last year. And it's on the YouTube page. You can go see that. It's dealing with spirituality, mental illness, race, and reincarnation. And we go into detail about that whole notion. And some people have been falsely diagnosed with certain mental illnesses. In reality, they just had unresolved issues with Nsamanfo, unresolved Egun, and so forth. They can engage that ritually and overcome this so-called illness. They never had an illness in the first place. So you can check that video out. All right. Okay. So somebody said, one individual said I had to leave the rooms because there was no teaching being made. Just what Odwirafo is speaking of. Animaniacs is crazy to see online, but even worse in real life. Okay, exactly. Let me see. I just want to make sure I didn't miss anything. Right. Somebody says this document and the book More Means Dead need to go together. Exactly. So you'll have, we're talking about this Cartoon Scholars article and our book, More Means Dead. You have a number of these unstable individuals found in these various movements because these groups, organizations, they're open and people they're looking for membership, whether it's Hebrews or Moors or Muslims or, of course, Christians. But even when people break away from Christianity, these other groups want to get their numbers up. So they will accept anybody who comes in. Their arms are open wide. Come on in, brother. We're so glad you're here. They just make them feel so welcome. People who couldn't, quote unquote, make it in mainstream society, people who are mentally ill, people who cause problems in different areas, they show up in these organizations and arms are wide open. So you have a lot of individuals. You study or you read some posts from individuals, they dress a certain way and they pretend like they're pure and everything else, but then they have insanely, perverse views on, for example, black women. They just go in and just incessantly assault black women online day after day after day after day after. How can somebody spend that kind of time just dogging black women, coming up with all kinds of unique names for different kinds of black women? I mean, just insane. And some of them are just sexual as well, and rooted in that, but just the fact that you have individuals who are locked into that kind of nonsense. You'll find them in Moorish groups, you find them in, Nation of Gods and Earth, you find them in various Muslim groups, Hebrew groups, as well as Christian groups and so forth, pseudo-Kemetic groups, extraterrestrial groups, atheist groups. You find individuals, they finally found some acceptance. People just let them in. They open up the doors to them. And these kinds of organizations are full of mentally unstable individuals who know what to say on the surface to sound intellectual. But as soon as you pierce that veil by simple HWEHWEMUDua investigation, their entire identity crumbles. And that's when they get angry and they begin to lash out. And you know you're dealing with an unstable individual. Sometimes it leads to a physical confrontation and people stalking individuals and so forth. So we need to know what's actually going on in a lot of these organizations. Of course, mental illness, thinking God is a white man, that's mass hysteria. So we know about that. But some of these other groups, as well as what's key, the leaders of these groups, as well as individuals who promote themselves as knowledgeable scholars and teachers and linguists and everything else, we typically don't associate those kinds of individuals with mental instability. But when you investigate and look at the behavior of these individuals, now you're seeing a totally different side. Now you're seeing something that's manifests as Animania. All right. One question, if they are not connected to the Abosom, Nyame, what then is the basis of their power and control over us? And I think you're going back to when we talked about the whites and their offspring. And, okay, so the whites and their offspring, we have one thing that's key. We need to understand true historical information because we've been given false truth. And again, we have not investigated. So, for example, this notion that the whites and their offspring have been ruling black people for 400 years. Now, how were they able to rule us for 400 years if we were so powerful? Why is it that our gods and goddesses didn't save us and the white God allowed them to rule over us for 400 years? Now, simple investigation, that a child can do, will disprove that up front. If you look at the quote-unquote slave coast, as they misnomer it, you look at where Ghana and Ivory Coast and Nigeria and Senegal and these various areas, you'll find when did they begin to lose their independence to the whites and their offspring. For example, in Ghana, the Asante Empire was ruling most of the area that's called Ghana today. The Asante Empire were annexed by the British. There were a number of wars that they called them the Anglo-Asante Wars. The Anglo or the English fighting against the Asante. The Anglos, the English had, the British had other people like the Fanti and some other groups fighting along with them. They waged war in an alliance against the Asante Empire. Asante is a large Akhan group. The Asante is a large Akhan group as well. There were a number of wars. The first few wars, the British against the Asante won the war. The last war that the British won, why did they lose the first few, but then the British finally won the last war? Because at that particular time, and this was going over years, they were fighting the British and their allies would fight against the Asante, lose the war. They regroup, come back later, fight against the Asante, lose the war. Regroup, fight against the Asante, lose the war. In the final war, the British and their allies finally won and annexed or took over the Asante Empire, which at its height its territory was almost as large as the entire country of Ghana, today's borders of Ghana today, the Asante Empire's reach included almost that entire area, that entire country. So it was basically the British took over an entire, like all of Ghana, basically. That happened in 1901 when the British annexed Asante. The British, the Europeans, showed up in the region where the Akhan people are in 12,472, which is in the Gregorian calendar, 1472. If they were there from 1472, but they didn't take over until 1901, they took over amongst the Fanti in the 1880s, they were there for 400 years. They were there from before enslavement began in North America in the 1400s, all the way through enslavement and after enslavement was over, and they still were not in control. And they didn't take control until the late 1880s, the late 1800s into the 1880s, and amongst the Fanti, but then amongst the Asante, it was 1901 when they finally annexed. And when they annexed, it was because Asante had fallen into a civil war where they were fighting one another and killing one another in a civil war. And once they were engaged in the civil war, internally killing each other, then the British and the Fanti and their allies attacked from the outside and attacked the Asante while they were already fighting one another. And the more powerful side, the Asante side that was dominating the other Asante group, the weaker Asante group began to defect to the British side. So we were in an internal conflict, and that's when the Whites and Arrow Spring took over. Then in 1956, Ghana gained its independence in 1956 under Kwame Nkrumah. So from 1901 to 1956, politically, the Whites and Arrow Spring were in control, politically, on the surface. 55 years. Try to tell an Asante person that the white man has been ruling them for 400 years. They were aware of the Whites and Arrow Spring for over 400 years, but the Whites and Arrow Spring ruled for 55 years into 56 years, and then they took control of themselves. And if you look all over the so-called slave coast, the western part of the continent where the dungeons are and our people were being taken, the Whites and Arrow Spring didn't take control of those areas until the late 1800s, into the 1880s, 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, after enslavement was over. So where's this notion that we were enslaved or being ruled by the white man for 400 years or 6,000 years, which is nonsense from the Nation of Islam? The 400-year refrain comes from the Bible, and of course the Muslims and then of course the Christians have repeated this refrain over and over again to the point that we actually incorporate that. That didn't happen in North America. When we talk about our enslavement in North America, yes, we were here in the 1500s and so forth. Our people began waging war. Most people, when they came over here, they lived about 7 years. Many of our people suffered on plantations, and like we talked about last week, we talked about various people in various parts of North America in the so-called slave states who waged war against the Whites and Arrow Spring, killed them, burned down plantations, freed themselves, and established independent sovereign nations in areas like Dismal Swamp, where there were hundreds of people living intergenerationally free while other people were enslaved because they embraced their ancestral religion, and it empowered them to free themselves from enslavement. So we had a whole broadcast about that. So we look into the actual true history. The Whites and Arrow Spring, they didn't have power over us. They didn't engage some spiritual power. They're not connected to any deities at all. They don't have any help spiritually. They had to wait for us to be engaged in warfare against one another. And when we're weakening ourselves, then they would ally with the weaker group. They did that with the Fanti, for example. The Fanti were already being dominated by the Asante. So the British allied with them and said, hey, you can't, they've been crushing you for years. You're never going to win against them, and we can't defeat them either. If we join together, maybe we can defeat the Asante. And then if we do so, then you're going to have to let us be in control. If not, then we'll just leave and the Asante will continue to dominate you like they've been doing. So, of course, this is what the Asante did. They allied with the British. And you have other groups that were being dominated by another Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit group. The whites and offspring would see that happening, and they would try to ally with the weaker group to help take out the stronger group. And once the stronger group was pushed out of power, then the whites and their offspring would say, well, now that we pushed them out of power, you're going to have to let us be in control. And if you don't let us maintain control and be in a rulership position, then we will leave and go back to Europe, and that group will simply come back and dominate you like they've been doing all along. And some of our people engaged that process. Some of them said, well, we'll allow the whites and offspring to think they're in control, but once we force the other group away from us, who's been dominating us for years before the whites and offspring got here, once we get rid of them and use the whites and offspring's artillery to get rid of them, then we're going to turn on the whites for trying to set us up in the first place. And sometimes they would do that, and the whites would pull back, then the other group would come back and wage war against the weaker group. They would dominate them again, so they were playing one group against the other. They did that in West Afuraitkaitnit, Afuraitkaitnit. That's why it took them until the late 1800s, for example, during the Berlin Conference, when they began to carve up different parts of the continent. They had to wait to see what groups are waging war against one another. Very often you have some black group who embrace some aspects of Islam, Mohammedanism, and then they're waging war against another black group. Now there's internecine warfare between one black group and the other. Then the whites and offspring would come in and arm the weaker group and help them to wage war against the stronger group and create all kinds of chaos and disorder. They have no spiritual help from anyone. And they were not dominating anything until we fall away from our own culture. Some of our people become, dominant, criminal, start waging war and, oppressing weaker groups. There was some Asante doing that. There were some Denchara groups. They did that to the Asante people. The reason the Asante Empire became the most powerful empire of the time in Ghana is because the Denchara prior to that were ruling over the Asante, the people who would become the Asante, so harshly and so criminally that there were different groups who came together and said we need to form a confederation so we can wage war against the Denchara people. The Denchara was another Akhan group, but they were dominant. But they were ruling harshly, criminally, as a matter of fact. And people don't like to be oppressed. So different groups came together. They became the Asante Confederation. They united forces, and they waged war against the Denchara and finally overthrew them and crushed them. At first it was all good, but then the Asante began to expand themselves. And they began to expand their empire, and then they started ruling harshly against other groups that they were ruling against. So sometimes we would engage in that kind of nonsense. That will lead to internecine warfare, civil war. And when we war against ourselves, we weaken ourselves, and that's the only opportunity for the whites and offspring to come in and gain some kind of foothold. That happened in West Afuraitkaitnit. That also happened in ancient Kemet and Knesset and so forth. They had to wait for us to fracture internally. They were waging war against Kemet for thousands of years, and they were getting crushed for thousands of years. They had to wait for us to fracture internally. That's why you have a first intermediate period, a second intermediate period, a third intermediate period. You have thousands of years of rule, but then you have a few intermediate periods that may last for 100 years or 200 years where there's political chaos because there was a fracturing in society. It was during those times that the whites and offspring could come in because there was a fracturing, civil war, and so forth, and they would gain a little control somewhere, but then we'll rebound in another 1,000 years of rule where we're doing what we're doing. So it had to do with us weakening ourselves. It was never a situation where they were just powerful, and definitely has nothing to do with any spirituality. The whites and offspring want us to believe that they tapped into some sacred sciences and they use them against us. That's pure idiocy. And again, investigation. They have no capacity to deal with any deity. They want us to believe that, no different than Christianity. They want you to believe that the white God told them to come and rule over the people, and therefore you need to accept it because that's what God wanted. When we reject Christianity or meme, is repeated in a different form. Now they say, well, they attune to our sciences and they got our sacred rituals, and they use the sacred rituals against us, and the spirits were helping them, and now that's pure nonsense. No deities communicate with, possess, interact with the whites and offspring, never have and never will. And we dealt with that in different broadcasts. So check out some of the archives, the Akanfo archives, and we go into detail about that in different archives. All right, so we just want to make sure we didn't miss anything. Okay. Okay, some people said they have seen some of these individuals in Facebook groups talking about these, emotionally unstable individuals. And this is key because it's not, we're talking about, if you look in traditional culture, there will be a percentage, very small percentage, but still a percentage of individuals who manifest Adan, manifest mental illness, manifest behavioral illness, spiritual illness. They would typically go to a Akanfo, a priest to find out what spirit is messing with them so they can repel that spirit. Some of them bring these discarnate, wayward spirits into the world with them when they incarnate or reincarnate back into the world because they were engaged in some nonsense in the previous lifetime. So that can be found out and things can be done. But it happens, just like it happens in your body that some cells become cancerous. That takes place, but then you have an immune system to protect you against that. All right, so, but we need to understand that as an Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit body, you have individuals that manifest behavioral illness, and some of them incarnated with that. And some of them picked it up along the way simply because they're receptive to some negative entities for many different reasons. Can it be taken care of? Yes, it could be taken care of, but many of these individuals don't want to engage in it because they're on some kind of ego thing. But it's a difference between seeing somebody outside disheveled and, engaged in, very self-destructive behavior, and okay, this is somebody who's mentally ill. But we've been engaging these people because they have titles of spiritual elder, teacher, master teacher, linguist, author, speaker, and so forth, and you're looking at a mentally ill individual. So if you investigate and you get beyond that, and then we don't waste time, we simply, when you come in contact with them, if, as we said in the beginning, if you're mature, if you're sincere, if you're intelligent, if somebody manifests insane behavior, but you have information to give that's helpful, then you give the information. Because if they're really sincere and if they're mature, but they just are misinformed, then whatever is truthful, they will take it and they will utilize it to help, empower themselves and better themselves and bring harmony to themselves. If they're ignorant and immature and they just want to be entertained and truth is not important to them, then nothing you say is going to matter because all they want to do is to continue to perpetuate their false sense of self-worth because deep down inside they're inadequate. So they're immature, and some people are extreme in that area, and they're insane. And they're going to continue to engage in that behavior unless there's something ritual done, and they're going to have to want to engage a process of healing. If they don't want to do that, then they're going to continue. So you're wasting your time, but then you're wasting time of other individuals who could be benefiting from what you have. So we give that information, to the people who need it. Even just on a basic level. This is why we say Akasakasa mmofrasem. Debates are for children. We cross into the threshold of manhood and womanhood at puberty. So we get beyond engaging in little debates. Even if little kids are arguing, you say, stop that arguing. What are you arguing for? And that's when they're 4 and 5. You stop them from doing that because you're saying even at that age, that's not what a big boy and a big girl does. So how is it that you can become in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and so forth, and now you're arguing and debating all the time and think that's normal and human? And you're telling your 5-year-old to stop doing that. We've been truncated developmentally, spiritually, by embracing this culture. as soon as we reject this culture, we get back to normal and get back to even just the basic mindset of somebody who just crossed from puberty into manhood and womanhood and not engaging in nonsense and foolish debate. Tell the truth to those who are ready and want that. Ready simply meaning they're desirous of it. If they don't, then you block them, you dismiss them, and you deal with people who do. And those who are isolated and rejected, the idiots will get angry and lash out and whatever, but then they have to do that amongst themselves because now they're isolated and dismissed, and you don't entertain them on any level at all. You don't engage them. You totally cut them off. So they become isolated and angry. Well, they can be angry with themselves. But then the ones who are really do want to know something deep down inside after a period of isolation, they'll figure out, well, maybe I need to do something different. Maybe I need to pay attention to what I was given, and that's the only thing they're going to be able to do because they're not going to be able to engage you because you've already cut them off. So the only option they have is to continue in their idiocy or to embrace what you gave. And then they can make a decision. And they're going to have to do that. They're adults. They need to do that. So this is what we need to understand. Much of the self-destructive behavior, like we said earlier, is based on this simple principle. Once people begin to move in that direction, cutting off the idiots and the agents and dealing with people who are normal, who really want to know something, you'll see a drastic reduction in self-destructive behavior, and you'll see a movement of people beginning to develop themselves and, begin to renew their minds, renew their consciousness. Okay, so let us, just want to make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay, so some people were saying they had joined some of those groups and saw a lot of misinformation. Okay. And I just want to make sure there weren't any questions in here. Okay, somebody mentioned later on, right, Kwame Nkrumah later on married a white Arab. So that brainwash mentality still, and of course, that trickles down. So you still, bleaching creams, one of the number one cosmetics all across West Afuraitkaitnit. You see white Jesus all over Ghana and so forth. People have not embraced divine hate yet, but they're beginning to. We have people in Ghana and so forth who are studying proper information and incorporating that. So, all right. All right, just want to make sure I didn't miss anything else before we move forward. Okay, so before we get to the phone line, I want to go through this document, Truth and Falsehood. I want to go through this real quick because this gives more texture to what we're talking about, and it's a specific document from ancient Kemet dated around the so-called 19th dynasty. Most people have not seen it before, but it's been out there. They'll call it, found on what they call the Chester Beatty Papyrus number 2. Different titles for it. Some people call it the Blinding of Truth by Falsehood or Truth and Falsehood and so forth. Part of the text was damaged, but then you have also, most of it was not damaged, but there's a portion that is. But when you look further down into the text where it repeats certain things that were at the beginning of the text, then you can see where some of the damaged pieces, what it would have said. So you'll see that in this particular rendition. The link we have, we just put the link in the chat room, but you can find it. Truth, if you just Google Truth and Falsehood, Ancient Egypt, you'll find all kinds of different translations all across the internet. The Chester Beatty Papyrus number 2. So this is just one of many translations, but as you read through, and as we always say, of course, it's always best to begin to learn to study the language yourself, study a language of Afuraitkaitnit today, like the Akhan or Congo or Yoruba, whatever one you're drawn to, because when you look at those words and concepts and deities and so forth, you will find them in the language of ancient Kemet, and you can use the contemporary expression of the language today to to correct and give proper vocalization and understanding cosmologically to the text as they're translated today. You'll be able to translate them yourself, or you look at the translations that exist and you can make corrections based on your knowledge of the culture that's still alive in our blood circles today. All right, so truth and falsehood. So it says the papyrus dates from the 19th dynasty. The tale occupies the 11 pages of the recto, 4 pages of the verso. The beginning is lost, and the first 4 pages have numerous lacunae. The lost beginning may be summarized as follows. So some of it was damaged, but based on looking at the rest of the text, you can kind of tell the few lines that were damaged in the front. This is summarized what it would have said where it was damaged. Truth and falsehood are brothers. Falsehood, the younger brother, has denounced to the Pau'un Toru, or what they call the Ennead, the company of the divinity, the tribunal of the divinity. So falsehood, the younger brother, denounced truth, the older brother, to the council of the deity. He claims that he had lent truth a wondrous dagger or a knife of extraordinary size, and truth failed to return it to him. He proceeds to describe the dagger. And so this is what falsehood is saying to the company or the tribunal of the deity. All the copper of Mount Yal had gone into the making of its blade. The timber of the grove of Gebtu, the region of Gebtu, was its host. The god's tomb was its sheath. The cattle of Kal formed its belt. So he was saying that the knife was so big that all of the copper in a certain mountain had gone into the making of his blade. Of course, he's exaggerating. The timber of the grove of Gebtu, which is a region in Kemet, the timber of that grove was in its house. The deity's tomb was its sheath. So the tomb of a deity, that's how the knife was so big that the tomb of a deity was the sheath of the knife. The cattle of Kal formed its belt. So it was so big that the belt around the knife, cattle were able to fit around it. This is how huge the knife was. That truth did not give back to his brother falsehood, and that's why he's taking truth to the tribunal of the deity. Then falsehood said to the group of deities, "Let truth be brought. Let him be blinded in both eyes, and let him be given to me as doorkeeper of my house." And the tribunal of the deities did all that he had asked. Now, many days after this, falsehood raised his eyes to see, and he observed the virtue of truth, his elder brother. Then falsehood said to the servants of truth, "Take your master and cast him to a savage lion with many lionesses." So they took him. Now, as they went up with him, truth said to his servants, "Do not take me. Find me a little bread. Go and tell falsehood, when we had left him, a lion came out," and there's this discrepancy in the text. So basically, falsehood, after his elder brother had been blinded, he had been made to be falsehood's doorkeeper. Then falsehood was paying attention to him and realized that his elder brother was full of virtue. And since he was full of virtue, at some point, people were going to figure that out, and falsehood would have been exposed. So he told his servants, "Listen, go get truth, go cast him to the lions, let him die, and nobody will figure out that I lied on truth." As the servants were taking truth away and about to cast him to the lions, truth said, "Listen, don't do that." But then there's a discrepancy in the text, but they eventually didn't throw him to the lions. He didn't get eaten up. The next part says, "Now, many days after this, a lady went out of her house, accompanied by her servants. They saw truth lying beneath a thicket. And he was a handsome man to the lady. There was none like him in the whole land. They went to where the lady was and said, 'Come with us and see the blind man lying beneath the thicket. He should be brought back and made the doorkeeper of our house.'" And notice we're going to talk about the doorkeeper. The lady said, "Hasten to him, I want to see him." So they went and brought him back. When the lady saw him, she desired him very much, for she saw that he was handsome in all of his form. They slept together that night, and he knew her with the knowledge of a man, and she conceived a son that night. Now, many days after this, she gave birth to a boy whose like did not exist in the whole land. He was tall. There was a discrepancy in the text. He was like the child of a deity. He was sent to school to learn to write very well. He practiced all the arts of war. He surpassed his older companions who were at school with him. Then his companions said to him, "Whose son are you? You don't have a father." And they reviled him and mocked him. "Hey, you do not have a father." Then the youth said to his mother, "What is the name of my father?" Because she never told him. "I want to tell it to my companions, for they quarrel with me. Where is your father?" These are the children who are engaged in foolish debate. Akasakasa. He said, so they say, "Where's your father?" So they say, and they mock me. His mother said to him, "You see the blind man who sits by the door? He is your father." So she said to him. And he said to her, "You deserve that your family be gathered in a crocodile's stomach," because he was angry that she never told him who his father was. The youth brought his father inside, made him sit on an armchair, placed a footrest under his feet, and put food before him. He gave him to eat, he gave him to drink. Then the youth said to his father, "Who blinded you? I will avenge you." He said to him, "My young brother blinded me." And he told him all that had happened to him. The youth went off to avenge his father. He took 10 loaves of bread, a staff, a pair of sandals, a water skin, and a sword. He fetched an ox of very beautiful color, and he went to where the herdsman of Falsehood was. So Falsehood had flocks, cattle, and so forth, and he had a herdsman who tended the cattle. So the young man went to where the herdsman of Falsehood was, and he said to him, "Take for yourself these 10 loaves, the staff, the water skin, the sword, and the sandals, and guard my ox for me until I return from town." So he gave him all these gifts, like, "Will you please, watch my ox? If you do that, I'm giving you all these gifts. Just watch him until I return from town." And the herdsman did so. Now many days after this, when his ox had spent many months with Falsehood's herdsman, Falsehood came to the fields to view his cattle. Then he saw the ox of the youth, which was exceedingly beautiful in color. He said to his herdsman, "Give me this ox. I want to eat it." The herdsman said to him, "It is not mine. I cannot give it to you." Then Falsehood said to him, "Look, all my cattle are in your charge. Give one of them to its owner." So he's like, "I want this ox to eat. If the owner comes back of the beautiful ox, just give him any of the other cattle." Then the youth heard that Falsehood had taken his ox. He came to where the herdsman of Falsehood was and said to him, "Where is my ox? I do not see it among your cattle." The herdsman said to him, "All my cattle are yours. Take one you like." The youth said to him, "Is there another ox as big as my ox? If it stood on Amen's island, the tip of its tail would lie in the papyrus marshes, while one of its horns would be on the western mountain and the other on the eastern mountain. The great river is its resting place, and 60 calves are born to it daily." So, of course, he's trying to say that his ox, of course, this is exaggeration. He's saying that the ox was so big and so huge that its body was stretched from North Kemet all the way to the south, and its horns would reach from the eastern mountain range to the western mountain range, and the river itself was just like a pad for the ox to lie upon. So the herdsman said to him, "Does there exist an ox as big as you say?" Then the youth seized him and took him to where Falsehood was, and he took Falsehood to the court before the tribunal of the deity. And the deity said to the youth, "What you have said is false. We have never seen an ox as big as you say." Then the youth said to the company of deities, "Well, is there a dagger as big as you said? One that has Mount Yal in it for copper, and whose half the grove of Gebtu, whose sheath consists of the tomb of the deity, and his belt the herds of the cow. And he said to the group of deities, judge between truth and falsehood. I am his son. I have come to avenge him. Then falsehood took an oath by the deity, saying, as Amen lives, as the ruler lives, if truth is found alive, I shall be blinded in both eyes and shall be made doorkeeper of the house of truth. Then the youth led the deities to where his father was, and he was found to be alive. Then they inflicted punishment upon falsehood. He was smitten with 5 open wounds, blinded in both eyes, and made the doorkeeper of the house of truth. Thus they settled the dispute between truth and falsehood. Okay, so a lot of information in there. Anybody who, if you're paying attention and you're seeing that, the older brother is the truth, the younger brother is falsehood. He sets up truth to get killed. Both of his eyes are, taken out, quote unquote, and he's blinded. It's like an eclipse, of course. After he's blinded, laid out in a thicket, then the lady whose servants discover him, she mates with him. She gives birth to a son. The son grows up to avenge the father, and then eventually the company of the deities, they make a decision, and truth is restored to its proper place, and falsehood becomes the doorkeeper to the house of truth. Of course, that is a retelling in this particular story of the story of Alsar, Set, and Heru. So the older brother is Alsar. He's killed by the younger brother, Set, who's falsehood, so to speak. The young man, of course, is the one who's born to avenge his father and goes before the company of the divinities, just like in the contendings of Heru and Set. Eventually Set is the judge to be a liar, and then he becomes the doorkeeper of the house of truth. He becomes the one who sits at the gate in the house of truth. If you go through that gateway, if you want to come to truth, you have to come through that gateway. If you're leaving truth, then you're going to have to leave and pass through that gatekeeper. That gatekeeper is Set, or also called Sut. In Yoruba tradition, he's the opener of the way. He's Esu or Eshu. He's the communicator. He's a Nazi in our Akhan culture. So there's a great deal of cosmology tied up into the story. So when you reread the story, understanding that this is a retelling in a mundane sense of Alsar, Alset, Set, and Heru, and so forth, then you'll see, different cosmological aspects of the story. When they talk about blindness, we talk about the difference between darkness and blindness. Darkness is natural. When the sun sets, it's darkness. The black substance of space is divinity, a male and female divinity, Ka and Ka'et, the great soul, Ka, the great soul, Ka'et. But blindness is a perversion. That's a corruption. That's not natural. Darkness is natural. Blindness is a perversion of sight. It's a corruption. So when they talk about somebody becoming blinded, you're talking about, in the solar realm, you're talking about an eclipse. When there's an eclipse and then there's a blocking of the divine living energy of the sun, and everything falls in darkness in an unusual cycle, not a normal cycle. Then eventually that eclipse moves on, and then the light is, restored. That happens with us. We become eclipsed. We become blinded. And truth becomes blinded. And falsehood runs rampant. And falsehood is walking around in the form of where the older brother should be, where the truth should be out there informing the people. Now he's been blinded somewhat, and now falsehood is out there, quote unquote, teaching the people. He's in charge. He has a cattle. He has a herdsman who's watching the cattle. The herdsman is watching the whole flock, the whole herd of cattle and so forth. Falsehood is in charge. So you have individuals out front, and then they have flocks, so they have cattle following them, misinforming people on a regular basis, and the truth has been blinded or eclipsed. But at some point, there's a union of the divine male and divine female. They give birth to Heru, or give birth to the young one who wants to avenge truth. and bring truth to the forefront. And eventually, just like with Heru giving the eye of Heru to Asar, and that's what resurrects Asar, eventually he takes falsehood before the company of the deities, the Abosom, the divine forces in nature. And once he puts them in front of them, the embodiments of divine order, then falsehood is exposed, truth is resurrected and put in its proper place. So when we approach information, just like we talked about George Washington Carver attuning to the spirit in nature, that's attuning to the Abosom, going before the Abosom, attuning to those forces of divine order, then taking what is received from them and then bringing it into the laboratory and replicating what he was given, and then using that to restore order, crops that had suffered under drought and everything else. And we do the same thing. When we want accurate information, we go to the Abosom first, attune to the forces in nature that govern everything through the agency of your own Kra, which is the Abosom in and of itself. It is through your Kra and the eye of your Kra, which is the Aku or the Hunhun, your quote-unquote third eye, but through your Kra, your soul, your divine consciousness, the deity that dwells in the head region, you can attune to the other Abosom to find out what is true, what is accurate, what's real, what's not real. You reject falsehood and you embrace truth. Once you get that accurate information, then you ask them to show you where it is tangibly so that then you can convey that information to other people as well. This is the process whereby we get the information that we get and then we investigate it after we've been given the information, then we ask the Abosom to show where we can find it. And then we find it and then we publish it. Therefore, it's taken from the spiritual realm to the physical realm so people can verify for themselves. Anything we're talking about, for example, in ancient Kemet, we can direct people to those texts so they can find it. For example, the term Afurakani, referencing the first landmass to raise up out of the primordial ocean. This is where Afuraitkaitnit comes from, or Africa comes from. The Abosom directed us to where to find that in the text. So that's the spiritual side. Then we have to get up and go look in the text to see if it's there. Of course it's there. And then once we find it, then we can take that text and then publish it and put it out so other people can go to the same text and find the actual information. So first you get the direction, then you go and verify. And once you verify, then you can share. That's how we operate. That's normal. That's natural. So we have individuals out here making all kinds of claims about spirituality and cosmology and language and culture and all this other stuff. You go to your Kra first, you go to the Abosom first, you go to your Nananom and Samanpo first, then you ask them to direct you to what's accurate. And when you do that simple thing, you'll expose 99+% of these individuals who are constantly misinforming our people, whether it's about our identity, whether it's about our language, whether it's about practice of ancestral religion, whether it's what direction we need to take, what kinds of decisions we need to make with regard to establishing ourselves, with regard to nation building, how we need to interact with and confront our enemies, the whites and their offspring, and their pseudo-culture and religion and so forth. If you listen to these misguided individuals, falsehood, then truth is blinded. But when you do the same thing that the young Heru did, get that information, go before the divinity, expose the truth, expose falsehood, and then put things back into place, then we don't have a problem. Okay, we have some calls. We want to get to the calls. We want to show you that there's a cosmological basis for the way we approach gathering information, conveying information, exposing falsehood, and resurrecting truth. So it's not about just listening to what people have to say because they're charismatic or because they seem like they know something or because they rattle off a great deal of information. You're like, wow, they must have really studied. A parrot can repeat the words of a human being. If a parrot can repeat a word, then surely human beings can repeat words. Gorillas can do sign language. So if gorillas can do sign language and use different forms to communicate. Surely a human being can read things and memorize them and repeat them. So memorizing a great deal of information and regurgitating it has nothing to do with intelligence. So once you look beyond that nonsense and see what is true, nokware in the Akhan language, true. What is true? What is false? Once you do that, the vast majority of these Negroes will crumble. And then you get some real information. So there's experts, as we said in the previous broadcast, in the Akhan and uncombed broadcast, spirit possession and spirit communication. The experts in our culture are your direct blood, nananum for your ancestresses and ancestors. Those are the experts. So you defer to them and them alone. Anybody else, if their information, direction doesn't comport with what your ancestresses and ancestors say, not somebody else's. Not somebody saying they came from the continent, they know more than you, so you have to follow them. No, your people. And it's your responsibility to develop a relationship with your people. Whatever anybody says that does not comport with your people and the abosom that govern you, then you reject what these fools have to say and just cut them off. They were never really connected to you in the first place, so you cut that misinformation off. Isolate those fools away from you and embrace what's real. All right, so we want to just checking through the links real quick. Make sure we didn't miss anything. All right. Okay. All right, so we have a few phone calls. Before we take the phone calls, just want to say it's a little bit less than 7 minutes left in the broadcast. We have a few phone calls, so we may go a little bit beyond overtime, beyond 11 o'clock. If you're listening online at 11 o'clock, the show cuts off, but if you're on the phone line, you can listen beyond 11 o'clock. So if you want to listen beyond 11 o'clock, you have 6 minutes to call in. The call-in number is 657-383-0635, 657-383-0635. And you have about 6 minutes to call in, or else you won't be able to hear beyond 11. All right, so we're going to take calls. We have Michiawo, number 5808. You got a question or a comment?
Michiawo, yes, I have a question, one major question, and perhaps if you can entertain a small question. I'm so glad you're doing this topic tonight, and it's really, this has really been on my mind a lot, so thank you. The question I have is about prophecy, and I've heard a lot of speakers, mostly online, who point to some writings somewhere on some walls that foretell our experience here in the Western Hemisphere. Some have claimed to have seen it on the walls in Kemet. There are some who claim that there was some Hopi Indian prophecy. There's all kinds of stories about prophecies and how our experience and how we came to be here was foretold a long time ago. So I wonder what Nana Psalm says about that. And the other one, I had heard this once. I wanted to know if it's true that the Abosom, the Odu, the Orisha, if they have any days off, like if there are some days you just can't reach them. Because that's something that somebody told me.
Okay. So, the first question, and just so you know, and then other people who have seen the channel may have not seen some of the broadcasts. So we have about 71 broadcast archives. One of them we talked about what they often call the prophecy of Nefertiti. But so we talked about that notion of what prophecy is and what it's not. So you can check that out. But first, the important piece, in the Bible, the Quran, and these other texts, there's no prophecy whatsoever at all, nowhere. Everything in those texts are just fragments of writings from ancient Kemet. Very often what they have done is there were things that took place in a certain region. They would write down that whole true story after it happened and then backdate the writings pretending like it was prophetic, which of course it was not. So they did that. But then when they talk about certain things taking place or the shaping factors of things that will cause certain events to happen, we have a document, Kamet Orit, the enslavement and restoration, and the enslavement and restoration of Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people in the Amenti in the West. So all we're talking about, when we talk about the story of Alsar, Set, and Heru, and it talks about Set, who's often depicted as red, capturing Alsar, who's called Kam-Ur, the great black one, and forces him into a sarcophagus, a coffin, and throws it in the water, and then it sails across the water, and then Set eventually finds the sarcophagus, opens it up, cuts up the great black one, Kam-Ur, into a bunch of different pieces and scatters his body all around. Then later on, Set, along with other Aboson, find the divinity, put him back together, mummify him, wrap him up in white and so forth, cotton, bandages, linen and so forth. Then eventually Heru gives him the eye of Heru. He's resurrected in the whole piece. Of course, that fits with what has happened with our people because, the reddish, ruddy ones, not that Set is the whites and offspring, but people who pretend like they're followers of Set, like in ancient Kemet, the whites and offspring start saying they were followers of Set. Of course, Set has nothing to do with them, but they would claim that, and then they have reddish skins and so forth. So, the reddish ones throwing the great black nation into a coffin, slave ship, thrown into the water, found, scattered, cut up, scattered all over the Western Hemisphere, bound up in cotton or on the cotton fields and the whole thing. But what we're talking about is anytime you get harmony with order, then certain things are bound to happen. It's no different than if you eat something that causes acne, you can prophesy what's going to happen based on what you've done. And it's not really prophecy in that sense. It's really cause and effect. If we get out of harmony with order, when we start engaging in disorder, then we pull away from the Aboson, we get outside of their orbit, so to speak, and now we're not living in harmony with order, then discarnate wayward spirits that have been trying to get at us for a while, they will have access now, no different than if you compromise your immunity. The bacteria that's floating around all the time, always trying to get into your system, normally your immune system destroys it, kills it, but if you compromise your own immunity, now these bacterium can get in and cause you problems. It's no different spiritually. If we get out of harmony with divine order, then we succumb to the negative, wayward, discarnate spirits, discarnate individuals who operate on lust, malice, and everything else, and they will draw us into certain kinds of behaviors, and those behaviors will lead to, certain kinds of results. And we can find out what path people are on. When people do divination and so forth, they can see what path an individual is on, or a group of people are on based on what they have done in the past up until the present moment, and what trajectory that they're on right now. And if they don't do something ritually to realign themselves with the Aboson, then you can see exactly where they're going. It's just like somebody standing on top of a building. Like we've said in a previous broadcast, if you see one car speeding towards an intersection 5 blocks away, going west, and then you see another car speeding towards the same intersection, and it's going north, but 5 blocks, in a different direction, the person on top of the building can see that these cars are going to meet and collide. The cars are 5 blocks away from each other. They don't know what's going on. But the one with the vantage point, they can tell what's going to happen. They can also radio in to one of the drivers and say, if you don't change course, you're going to meet with a negative consequence. The Nananum and Samampo, the ancestresses and ancestors, are on the rooftop. They have a vantage point that we don't have. the way spirit moves is faster than the physical realm. It's very similar to when somebody, if you fall asleep and you hit the snooze button for 5 minutes, and then you have all kinds of experiences only to be awakened 5 minutes later. You know you couldn't have done all of those things in 5 minutes. But spiritually, the energy moves quicker, so you can move and operate and actually have these experiences all fit into 3-dimensional 5 minutes. But your spirit moves quicker. So the Nsamanfo can see these things unfolding, and they can see them unfolding and what the consequence will be, and they can get to us because we're moving much slower, inform us and help us change direction before, everything unfolds and actually happens. They can remove us from that situation, from that trajectory. So that in and of itself, that's quote-unquote prophetic because they can see what's taking place and how it's unfolding. Then the other piece, that's the only time you have a real spiritual communication when Nsamanfo can see what's unfolding. The same thing with the Abosom. If the Abosom are going to do something, they're going to, cause something to happen. Somebody attuning to the Abosom to find out what are you going to do, and they say, well, we're going to do this, or this is what's going to happen. Then that's quote-unquote prophetic, but it's still based on this is what they're going to do. Just like if somebody called you and said, what are you going to do tomorrow at 10 o'clock, and you tell them, now that person knows what's going to happen at 10 o'clock. It's not prophetic per se, but since you're the agent and you're going to engage in that behavior, you can let them know what's going to happen in the future. If you attune to the Abosom, the forces in nature, and they let us know what's going to take place or what's not going to take place, or if somebody's on a trajectory where they're actually going to die tomorrow because of all the different things that they've done and put themselves in a certain position to meet a certain individual, and they haven't changed course, this is what's going to happen, then that's what's going to happen. So you can find out in that sense. But when you're talking about the Bible, Quran, all the pseudo-religions, including the pseudo-Native American stuff, none of that is prophecy. Don't exist at all. And then you had the second question was, what was the second question?
Do the Abosom, the Vodou, the Orisha, is there any time any day of the week that they are not available, like that you can't reach them, or that they need a break?
Okay.
That's what somebody told me.
Right. So sometimes what happens, for example, in the Akhan tradition, say you may have, and it depends on, of course, who you're dealing with, because the vast majority of people who claim to be in the Akhan tradition in America are worshiping spirits that are not actually Abosom, they're not actually Akhan either. So and we put a couple of articles out about that. But sometimes people will say, well, the sacred day of this Abosom is Benada Tuesday, and I go to the shrine on this day. It's not that the Abosom can be contacted. They can be contacted any day or at any time. But there may be certain days of the week, for example, Tuesday, Benada, Abenada, that's the day of the planet, Bena, Abena, and those Abosom operate through that planet. So their energy physically on Earth is, Bena is the planet Mars. So that is the planetary shrine for those forces in creation. Within the Earth, they have shrines as well, like the ionosphere, the thermosphere is the shrine for Bena on Earth. In the planetary sphere, the shrine is the planet Mars or Bena. So, because that planet's energy is dominating Earth on that day, physically, it's more energy abundant. So if you wanted to do something or get in harmony with that energy, it'd be easier for you to get in harmony with that energy since it's bathing the Earth. It's like if you want to get more solar energy, the Earth is always receiving solar energy. If you wanted to optimize your receipt of solar energy, you would do it during daylight hours as opposed to nighttime. It's not that the sun is not still shining, it's always shining. But if you want to optimize your interaction physically, then that's a way to do it. So sometimes they'll talk about certain days that are sacred to the Abosom because the energy is different on the Earth at that time, but the Abosom are always accessible to your Kra, to your soul, your divine consciousness. So it's never a time that they're inaccessible.
Okay. Can I just get a little clarification on the first question about prophecy? So is it true then that some maybe unscrupulous people have maybe got some information that came from a divination and wrote it down and said, this is prophecy, this is what's going to happen in 400 years?
Oh, you mean as far as...
Genesis. I'm thinking about Genesis 15:13 in the Bible and the book of Revelations. It seems like some of those things, just so relevant.
Well, if you look in the Bible, it has nothing to do, like when they talk about Deuteronomy and all of that, it has nothing to do with what happened here. Not only the time frame is totally inaccurate. We were not enslaved here for 400 years. I mean, even if you look at the time frame, 1865, 400 years before that is 1465. We were not here in 1465. They have, one is 400 years, one is 430 years. Either way, it doesn't work out, right? And then there are many people who got over here and they freed themselves from enslavement. Then you have many people in the northern states. They were brought over here and they were working in the northern free, quote unquote, free states. People like David Walker and others who had a a tailor shop. You know what I'm saying? So I mean, it's nonsensical. They want to force that in to make it seem like it fits, but in reality, what they were talking about when they were talking about ships and people being carried on ships, that had to do with what the Romans were doing at the time. They were when they would enslave people, it was easier for the Romans to put people on ships and transport them as opposed to transport them overland. So that was going on right then at the time. The brainwashed little Hebrews want us to believe that the only time anybody was ever placed on a ship was our people. So therefore the Bible must be right. That's insane. People have been transported on ships with regard to enslavement for thousands of years in the Indian Ocean, in the Mediterranean, up and down the Red Sea for thousands of years in many different areas. So when people just investigate point by point those pseudo little prophecies, they just totally fall apart. But that's what was going on right there in the Roman Empire at the time, and they know where the ships are.
Wow.
Book of Revelation is all the little symbols talking about the harlot and all these different things. When you look at, for example, the zodiac of Dendera in Kemet, and you look at those different animals and the different animal totems and their functions in creation, this is where they got that information. All that is what they would call judicial astrology. That's it. So different animals, different times, all of that has to do with astrology. So just looking at just some basic astrology from ancient Kemet, that's where they get all that information from. But it's not projecting anything. And even with regard to astrology, in the true sense, like if you look at an astronomical zodiac as opposed to the tropical or sidereal zodiac, you'll find that the astronomical zodiac, where the constellations actually are in reality, as opposed to where they used to be 2,000 years ago before the, prior to the precession of the equinoxes, the changes that are constantly going on. The way the sky looked 2,000 years ago, their relationship, different constellations with regard to one another is different. Now there are actually 13 signs that cross the ecliptic now instead of 12. So there are actually 13 signs of the zodiac, not 12. 2,000 years ago, there were only 12 constellations crossing the ecliptic. Now there are 13. They're not all 30 days each. One is 7 days. One is 32 days long. One is 25 days long. So they vary. None of them are the same. So an astronomical zodiac will actually give you, the actual positions of where these constellations are. 89% of the dates in the tropical zodiac that we see in newspapers and everything else is inaccurate. So 89% of the people who think they're on one particular sign, 89% of them are totally inaccurate. All their lives they were identifying with a certain sign. Only 11% are accurate. So All the people who are saying that they're a Gemini and therefore this, and this, nothing. Plus, the deities, like Gemini is, they'll talk about the two twins. In ancient Kemet, that was Shu and Tefnut, a male and female divinity. The whites and offspring will say it's Castor and Pollux, two little males, because they're homos and everything else.
Two males. Yeah, I've heard that lie.
Okay. So, and there are different divinities from ancient Kemet that are associated with these different constellations that are different from what the whites and their offspring put forth. But on top of that, those are just influences, but they are not determinants of what's going to take place. What determines our behavior, our function and creation is the deity that we are born into the world with. The movements of the planets and so forth just have influence. They have, certain kinds of influences, but they don't determine what's going to take place. The whites and offspring don't have any divinities connected to their blood circle, so all they can focus on are influences, but they don't even get the influences correct.
Okay, well, that clarifies a lot. That's a question that's always been on my mind, because everybody has a different story about how we came to be here.
Right. But we did check out some of the archives. In fact, the very first broadcast we did on Blog Talk, we talked about that Comment Uri article, talking about the enslavement and restoration and so forth. So we went into some detail about that, and we have another archive broadcast called Prophecy of Nefertiti. So it's in there. We talk about the difference between what a so-called prophecy is and what is really being talked about.
Okay, and can I find the article on the Odwirafo website?
Right. The article is there, as well as the link to the the link for the broadcast is on this Blog Talk channel, but yes, the article is on the Odwirafo website.
Okay, I'll look for it.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate the call.
No problem.
Okay. And we have one more call, 1113. Ichiabo, number 2389. You had a question or comment? Number 2389. Okay, can you hear?
Yes.
2389?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Okay,
Hello?
I can hear now.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yes,
I had my headphones on. Okay. Yes, I think it's just wonderful how you've been able to go and investigate and have been able to digest the information and explain it, whereas a person such as myself can understand it. It's just been, I can't even think of the word for myself. I guess it's just validated and confirmed a lot of things for myself. So I guess what I would like to know, when those individuals who study Christianity claim to have been called, to be a preacher, and you come to them with information that we're talking about, the ancestral summons, and they just refuse to hear it, do you think that those particular people at that time lose their crown? And how do you think they will be judged, or will they come back and reincarnate to learn the lesson? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. So it's a few things, and this is why it's important also for us to engage our own Krawa, to engage our Nananom Nsamanfo. So when we have these experiences as well, now we can give proper context to what's happening with these individuals, as opposed to individuals who sit down and read some historical books. They'll kind of have that Christian mindset, but they kind of blacken up the Christian mindset and start saying Egypt was monotheistic and we were just scientists and things like that.
Yeah. It's worse than that, what I've been told about this Bible. Like that this is it. This is, this is coming from the higher one.
Right. So then when people like that who just have read a lot and memorized a lot, and they may be have a degree or a teacher or whatever, when somebody comes to who's involved in church and said they got a calling and the Spirit told them or whatever,
right.
What happens is the person who said they had the calling, they may be communicating with the Spirit for real, and they can see this individual calls themselves Afrocentric, but has no spiritual experience. They can see, they can say, oh, Negro, you don't know anything about spirituality. You're reading a bunch of books.
Yes.
The Spirit is speaking to me, and you don't have that experience. And it's true in that sense, and the so-called Afrocentric individual, they're looking crazy because they know they don't have the experience that this person has. They can do is try to explain it away, but they can't, they can't engage that person. So when we practice ancestral religion, we have the same experiences, but we know the difference between, okay, you say you called, yeah, you were. Which spirit called you? But this carnate, cracker spirit of some drug addict who died in your family is now telling you to believe in Jesus. That's who called you, and they're still calling you, and you need to reject them and embrace a real harmonious song, and abo song, and pay attention to that spirit, not the criminal spirit who keeps you in church. So we can actually engage them on the level and give real information and expose them for listening to some wayward, discarnate spirits. So what happens with most of our people who are actually engaged in some spiritual experience like that, if they're not just some manipulative criminal-type pastor or something, if they really believe what they're doing because they're, say, for example, a slave master who raped their blood into the family, they'll try to communicate with the person. And because the person has been taught not to hate anybody or anything, when they see that Hachiwadiko, that cracker spirit show up, he will tell them, yes, I'm Jesus, because he's going to lie because he still wants to manipulate them. He knows he's not Jesus because Jesus don't exist. And he's on the other side, so he knows Jesus don't exist. But he still wants to control us from the side. So he'll say, yes, my child, I am Jesus. And the person will be getting on their knees praying every day to somebody who enslaved them and whipped them and tortured them and raped them, and asking them what they should do and how they should interact with their family and what kind of job to take. And this filthy cracker will be telling them everything they need to do. And then they'll come to church and say, I saw Jesus last night. He came. Yes. I remember a sister telling me she saw him show up in the living room. And it was a cracker showing up in the living room. I mean, it was Jesus from, slavery. So what happens with people like that, the ones, our people who are not criminal, but they're just brainwashed, as soon as they make their transition, then they realize immediately that Jesus isn't over there. Of course, Buddha and Muhammad, all them characters are fictional. They are in the ancestral realm now, so they know what's real. They see it. They're there. And then they realize that they wasted their entire lives following the false information. So typically what happens is the people who are still here, if they were involved in culture, they would do something ritually to help them move on. Sometimes if the people were generally good people, even though they were brainwashed, but they were nice people, then their ancestresses and ancestors will assist them to move towards the ancestral realm and start their development. If they were like criminals and repulsive, then their Unsamafo won't deal with them either, just like they didn't deal with them when they were on Earth. And they'll just be a wayward spirit that's hanging around earthbound, causing people problems and depression and everything else. But the vast majority of our people, when they make their transition, like you go to funerals and everything, and somebody was in the church for years and they died, as soon as their body, spirit separates from the body, that's when they realize. That's why we have the saying, death wakes up those who sleep through life. So as soon as they make their transition, that's when they realize that they wasted all of their adult life believing in fictional characters. Then they see who's in the ancestral realm now. They'll see some of these discarnate, lustful spirits hanging around. They'll see some of their ancestresses and ancestors, and then they'll start trying to, some of them, if they're intelligent, they'll go with their ancestresses and ancestors and start working to develop themselves in the Asamando, in the ancestral realm. Those who are depressed and angry and upset. They'll be hanging around the place where they died, the house where they died, the hospital where they died, harassing other people who come in there. They'll be doing that for a while until they are tired of that and want to try to do something different. So that's what typically happens.
Okay, then I appreciate that. I was very concerned because I have a relative, and we bought the ancestral jurisdiction to him, and we were like marked down. So it kind of bothered me a little bit. So I just kind of was interested in that, and I appreciate it. And I know it's late. I have another question, but I'll wait until another time.
Okay, we'll be back on tomorrow.
Okay, then I'll call back tomorrow. It's in reference to the public schools. Okay, so hotep and have a good night.
And you can also email us as well.
Okay, I shall. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, I'll say. Okay, so we got one more call. Michiamo, number 6495. You had a question or a comment? Or 6594. 773 area code. Okay. So it's 11:23. So we're gonna end here. But if you have a question that we missed, just hit us up, email us, and also like to say for the people who came in later, go to our Aakhuamuman website. That is our institution from which all of the publications, again, that we publish, all of the work that we do is based on our institution. We are working to establish a physical space, permanent location for our institution here in the D.C. area, but we will be live streaming our classes and workshops and so forth, so everybody can still participate, even if you don't live in this area. We are raising funds for that institution, so we have a GoFundMe campaign for the Akanfo, and then you can also go to our regular webpage as well. You can purchase books from our softcover books that will assist us to raise the funds to establish the center, as well as if you make a donation through the GoFundMe site, we will send you one or more of our books anyway. So any donation will, you'll receive something for your donation. In addition to helping to establish the center, you'll also receive something immediate, which is one or more of our books. So donation is really like a purchase. So it's not just a donation. And Yedase, for those who have made donations already, we really appreciate that support. We're trying to acquire, secure the lease for the property as soon as possible. We don't want it to be taken off the market. So any donation is helpful. We just put the link to the Akanfo page. That page has not only, which is on our regular website, Odwirafo.com, ODWIRA, F as in free, O.com. On the Akanfo page, not only does it talk about our institution, the kind of publications, employment, it would be an institution of learning, healing, training, employment, and entrepreneurship. So we talk about all those different areas, the different things that we have been doing and will continue to do. We'll be able to expand our services to the community, including the workshops, ritual practices, including our substance abuse abstinence, ritual methods, people to overcome that, intergenerational trauma, transcarnational trauma, as well as domestic violence. But then we also have Afurakani manhood workshops based on our book, Afurakani Manhood. We also will be having the Afuraitkaitnit womanhood workshops for the sisters, trained by sisters, of course, based on the book, which will be published, Afuraitkaitnit Womanhood. Not published yet, but it is coming. And then we have, the various classes on ancestral religion, culture, natural health, which is ritual movement for health and strength, toning, stretching, offense, defense, focus, and so forth. So all that information is on the website, so you can see all the various links, all the things that we're doing, and we'll be able to expand our services to the community. Of course, all of the 15 books that we publish are free online, and then we sell the softcover versions. We print them on our own printers in-house, and of course our publishing arm will be based in the center as well, so people will be able to be employed through that process, people working on the publications, printing them, putting them together, shipping and everything. We'll have some employment opportunities there, as well as the entrepreneurship side, which already exists and will be expanded, where you can purchase our books wholesale and sell them retail. You can do that now just by going to the website, going to the publications page on the website. We have a little orientation video, 43 minutes, talking about the orientation piece, how to become nokware, a distributor, and all you're doing basically is purchasing the books wholesale, and once you get them, then sell them retail. To friends, family, co-workers, people you're connected with, people you are doing work with in some capacity, or you come in contact with, or you feel need the information. Once they see our books, which are printed in color, the books typically sell themselves, so that's a way for you to generate income for yourself, and we can employ our people or help our people employ themselves immediately, no matter what your past work history is. You can begin working for yourself instantly, right away. So a number of different things that will be at the center, and this will be one of many in different regions. This will be the first one. We've been doing the work for a number of years. We were in Chicago. We've been in D.C. for a few years, and we'd like to establish a center here. But this will be the first of many. We're already doing the work, but now once we have a permanent place, we'll be able to expand the work that we've already been doing. Many more publications will be released and everything else. So, again, Yerase for your support. Go to our page, GoFundMe page, make a donation, let us know what book you want, what book or books you want, or go to the regular Akanfo page. You can make a purchase there or a donation there. Some people who would like to donate via PayPal, GoFundMe doesn't affiliate with PayPal anymore. They have their own system, and it's basically just using a credit card and so forth. Apparently they used to be with PayPal, they no longer are. So if you would like to make a donation via PayPal, you can just go to our regular site. We have a PayPal button for donations there on the same page, the Akanfo page, the page talking about our institution. We have the buttons for donation, as well as a link to the publications page where you can pick out the publications and purchase any. We have 15 books out in softcover. Of course, as we said, the ebook versions are all free online, but the softcover range between $8 and $11. And of course, any purchase of 10 books or more is automatically 30% off. So if some people buy the whole 15-book set, then it's automatically 30% off. Or if they just wanted 10 out of the 15 books, most of the books are $9. We have some of them are 10, most of them are 9. One of them is $8, one is 11, but the others are 9 and 10. So some people, instead of spending $96 for 10 books, it's 30% off, so it's actually $66 for 10 books. So that's basically $6.60 per book, and you'll get 10 books for $66 plus shipping. So, but that's the case with 10 books or more, 30% off, no matter what mix of titles you order. So again, contact us if you have any information, need any information, or any questions about what we've presented. Our contact information is on the website, as well as Facebook, Afuraitkaitnit, and then we have our own private network, Afuraitkaitnit.ning.com. And the link for that is on our regular website as well, so you can connect with us there. So Yerase, we thank you for tuning in. If you have any questions and we weren't able to get to you online, just send us an email and we'll connect with you. Yerase, we will be back on tomorrow. We will be sending out a notification for that event. So Yerase, we thank you, and we will meet again. Yebeshiapio.